Okay, cool. So we're going to build an adaptive quiz. Some people are saying exactly what I described the first time. Easier or harder based on responses. How do we feel about what Kira said? Making a quiz that gets either more difficult or easier based on the responses. I think that's a pretty solid definition of an adaptive quiz. Because that's what it's like when you do like standardized tests, right? Like if you're doing really well, you get harder questions, and if you're not doing as well, you get easier questions. I think we should go with that. That sounds doable. Okay. So yeah, let's do that. Okay, so the polls are closed. We're going to go with Kira's suggestion. The quiz will get harder as we go. So I'm thinking about how we want to start this. It probably doesn't matter so much what the questions are, since we're just doing this for programming reasons. And you can see here, I had Adobe XD open to design like a mock-up in case we wanted to focus more on the visual design. But since this one seems more programming intensive, I think we can probably jump right into storyline, since this is mainly going to be showing off triggers and stuff like that. Again, I have my resolution turned way down so that people with smaller screens can see this. So that's why my screen looks so cramped and like this. Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and skip Adobe XD, but this is where I do my visual designs usually for any client work or any storyline projects. But for this, let's focus on the programming because I want to make sure we have enough time to actually build the thing. So in storyline, I'm going to insert a question. So, this is story view. We can just double click on the slide to get into the slide. I'm going to double click on the slide title over here and call it question 1. Or maybe we'll have a quiz title screen. And then I'll duplicate this and we'll make a question 1. Okay. So I'm just setting things up right now. We're going to add a text box. This is the quiz welcome screen. Welcome to the quiz. We'll make this nice and big. What font do we want? Let's go with Lato. Oh, that's way too big. That's still too big. Okay, welcome to the quiz. And now we'll explain that it's an adaptive quiz. Whoops. So what I'm doing here is I'm just dragging it. I'm holding down Shift to keep it aligned. So if I'm not holding down Shift, you see like, if you move your mouse a little bit, it's going to go out of alignment. But using the Shift key is a good shortcut to keep it perfectly aligned. And then I'm going to hold down the Control button on my keyboard so that when I let go, it makes a copy. So that's an important shortcut if you're not already familiar with using the keyboard shortcuts. You hold down Shift to keep things constrained to the position, and then you hold down Control to make a copy of whatever it is that you're dragging. So I need to make the font size a lot smaller here. I'll make it half the size. This quiz will become more difficult as you answer questions correctly. Good luck. Cool. So another thing I like to do, because obviously alignment is important when you're trying to make things look visually appealing. And we're not doing a full treatment here. This obviously isn't something we would put in front of a client, but little tips like this. So you notice right now there's so much more white space above this text than below it. So it's not balanced. So we could add, we can add some sort of image here to make it more balanced. Or if we just have text, we can group these two text boxes, okay? And now selecting the entire group, you can use these alignment tools in Storyline. So you can do some center alignment, but what I want to do is I want to align this to the middle of the page so that we have equal space above and below the text. So again, I think this would have looked better with an image beneath, but that's just another useful thing. And then you can ungroup it. But yeah, the main idea is you can group things to work with alignment just to make things more mathematically precise versus just playing it by eye. Okay, so that's that. Now we need to actually ask the question. So what do we want the focus of our quiz to be? Let's think. We could do it based off of articulate storyline since that's the workshop we're doing. We can make it something easy so that the topic isn't, so that it's not so much focus on the topic. Questions about storyline? Okay, I can get behind that. So let's think about something easy in storyline. So what's easy? Adding a text box. So what about like which tab do you go to add a text box? And it would be the insert tab. So that seems easy enough, right? So which tab do you navigate to? Or that's going to be a double 2. How do you add a text box to the slide? Okay, that's a good question. And then we will add some options here. So again, this isn't going to be super nicely visually designed. And maybe if we have time, once we get the programming working, we can do a mock-up for what this question slide might look like. So the correct answer is the insert tab and then text box. We'll add some incorrect answers. Oops. So we'll go to the insert. So we'll say insert. We'll go to design and then text box. That's not correct. And then we'll just add a third incorrect answer here, and we will make it say slides to text box. Control T. There we go. Nice one. Cool. Jordan gave us another keyboard shortcut. This is awesome. You can just press Control T, and it will add a text box wherever your mouse is. Cool. Maybe that's the follow-up question if they get it right. What's the keyboard shortcut to add a text box? Nice one. Okay, so how do we want to let people select this? Right now, it's obviously not really clear that this is a button. Maybe we make these look more like buttons. Maybe I should have done that already. Well, I can do that easily with a shape. Let's see. And this text size doesn't need to be so big. We'll make this text size 18. I'm sure most people are familiar with this, but if you want to select multiple things on the slide like you see me doing, you just hold down Shift before you select the next thing. And then you can make things bigger, smaller as you go. Yeah, thank you, Jordan, for that. If anyone sees me doing something and you know a better shortcut or you have a tip about it, please share it like Jordan did. I mean, I know there are some people here who I'm sure are really good with storyline. So definitely speak up if you want to share what you know. Cool. Okay. So I'm just adding some rectangles to make these look more like buttons. That's what's going on here. And I'll probably center these within the button. So, you know, you have some text alignment options here, just like you would in storyline or anything else like that. But something cool to make sure that things are aligned well is you can select this text box inside this rectangle, and then you can use these formatting tools to align whatever is inside to whatever is outside. So I'm going to zoom in on this. So you see right now the middle handle on this text box is to the left of the middle handle of the rectangle. If you use this align center option, it will align that text box to the middle of whatever is outside of it. So I mean, I use these commands all the time just to keep things aligned well and to not have to just use guesswork. So if you are a beginner with storyline, definitely become familiar with these tools right here. And then similarly, we'll do align middle, but it looks like that was already aligned. So that's perfect. So we need some more contrast here. We'll make this text box white. You know, not a super attractive button by any means, but it's what we're going to work with here. Again, this is just a little mock-up. So I'm going to group these two things right here. So now we have a group, so it's like an actual button. So when you click the group, and again, I'm going to move this to the right, and then I can left align it. I'm going to play this one by eye, because you'll see where this breaks down is look at how much extra space there is before the H. So I could do one of two things. I could remove this left margin by going to the text box settings. Sorry. So you know, if you ever have that and you like need to get rid of that internal margin, you can go to format shape and then text box, and you can actually make that 0 if you wanted. And now if I were to align these left, it would be perfectly aligned with the text. Cool. So just another fun fact right there. I'm trying to show off stuff like that people might not know is there if you're just getting started. So hopefully that is useful. Now I'm going to duplicate this. And I'll show another useful command. You see, I kind of just played that by eye to make sure there's equal spacing between, but you can select all of these and you can use this distribute command. So this is again on that format tab. It's right around where we were using align center and align middle. You can distribute things vertically so that it has equal amount of space in between each thing. So that is another useful piece. Okay. So we have our question. So to make an adaptive quiz work, where things get more difficult as the quiz goes on, and I've decided to center this stuff. I think that will look better. Okay, so if we need to make this quiz get more difficult as things get on, what do we need, as the user answers questions correctly, what do we need to know about how they answer this question? And we're going to use a variable for this. What do we need to hold in a variable? Anyone feel free to answer this. I mean, maybe the answer is really easy and I should just give it away. I know there's a lag though, so I'll wait maybe 10 more seconds. Yeah, Karina, that's right. But yeah, I mean, I just did it with this rectangle because I already had the text box on the screen, but you can also just add a rectangle and then just add text within it. And you can use all of those same formatting options about internal margin to make sure the text is positioned how you want it within the shape. Okay. Yeah, I mean, we basically need to know either one, we need to know that they answered the question correctly. So we can do that one of two ways. We can just have a variable that says like, is question correct? Or we can create a variable that holds their response. I mean, that's maybe adding an extra step, okay? So Carlton is saying who said that? Orobindo, I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing your name incorrectly, but you're saying a counter for the number of questions answered correctly in a row. Do we need to know that? Do we need to know how many questions were answered correctly in a row, or do we need to know how many questions they've answered correctly up to that point? Because we can hold their score in a simple score variable, and every time they answer a question correctly, we'll add 1 to it. Maybe we should do it that way. Need to rate the difficulty of each question, Amadou says. So that gets into like weighted questions, right? It seems there are quite a few ways we can go about this. Sorry, I'm thinking about this because we're not using a question bank here. So this is going to wind up being it seems like it's going to wind up being a bit of a branching scenario. So if someone answers this correctly, go to this question. If they answer it incorrectly, go to this other question. And then we need to decide, is there a certain point? You know, if they answer the next 3 questions correctly, are we going to bring them back to this question? Like, obviously, there's some more planning that needs to go into this versus versus just programming it straight in storyline. Let's start programming this, okay? So we know we're going to want a user score variable, okay? So let's do that. So we'll make that a number variable. We'll start at 0. The user score obviously starts at 0. And I'm just going to do this because I think we might want to know it later on, is I'm going to create a question1 response variable. This will be a text variable, and it will hold the user's actual response so that later on, if I say, oh, I want to show this question, if the user answered question, okay, so we don't exactly need Q1 response. We need to know if they answered Q1 correct, right? We don't need to know, oh, did they answer slides text box or design text box? We want to know for the purposes of this tutorial, did they answer question 1 correctly? So I'll name the variable is Q1 correct. And if it's true, then that means it is correct. If it's false, that means it's not correct. Yeah, Storyline has built-in quizzing features. Like if you right-click a slide and do new slide, and then go to graded question, you can And this isn't templated, but it'll do a lot of the programming for you. I'm just building this from scratch. One, because that's what I do in most of my real world projects, unless it's already templated. And two, just to show the behind the scenes programming of how to make this work yourself. Because once you get down variables, conditions, and then just the shortcuts, you can work really effectively in Storyline and do pretty much anything that it's capable of. But I notice a lot of people who have been using Storyline, even for a few years sometimes, they don't dive so much into the variables and conditions. So I think that's something I really want to show off in this series. So that's why we're doing this by hand. Cool. So is Q1 correct? And now we need to use triggers to manipulate these variables. So we'll start with this one, insert text box. We know that is correct. So when the user clicks this, so if you're brand new to Storyline, you can add a trigger to something, and that's how you add interactivity, by selecting it. So in this case, I'll select the group, and then you can press this little page icon right here in the triggers pane. So it's create a new trigger. And first you decide the action. So what I want to do is I want to change a variable. So the actual action is called adjust variable. And the first thing I want to do is I want to set is Q1 correct equal to true. Okay? When they select this. And likewise, whenever the user selects one of these other options, I want to set is Q1 correct equal to false. So what I did is I just pressed this button right here to copy that trigger. And now I'm going to click on the next group and I'm going to paste that trigger. So, and now you don't need to even open up that whole window again, because with Storyline 360, you can change the variable that you're setting right here from the pane without even opening that dialog box. So we're going to set is Q1 correct equal to false for option 2, and we will set is Q1 correct equal to false when they select option 3. So this is fine. You know, maybe they click this one and okay, yeah, now we know Q1 correct is true, but then they change their mind and they select this one. Well, we don't even have a submit button. So for the purposes of this tutorial, when they click something, it's getting submitted. Okay. So there we go. We set that programming up. And now we need to monitor the user's score. So we're going to adjust another variable when the user selects the correct option. And we're going to add 1 to user's score. So by default, it has you setting the variable. We want to change that set command to add. And we're going to add value 1 to user score when the user clicks group 1. Okay? So we're in good shape so far. When they select the correct answer, we change that Q1 correct variable to true, and we're adding 1 to the user's score. The next thing we do is we need to get to the next slide. So we'll add 1 final trigger to each of these buttons, and whenever the user clicks it, we will jump to the next slide. So the action is jump to slide, the slide is next slide, and it's when the user clicks group 1. An important thing to remember about this, and that I know I messed up when I was first learning about Storyline, and I see people make this mistake a lot. Whenever you jump to the next slide, whenever this command is executed, anything after it on the current slide is not going to happen. So look at this order of triggers right here. If we have jump to next slide as the first trigger, these variables are never going to get set because Storyline executes these triggers in order. So what it's going to do here is it's going to jump to the next slide, and then it's not going to have access to any of these other commands that were on this slide. So Q1 correct will never get set. Adding 1 to the user score will never get set. You get the idea. And again, since this is the first question, we're not going to jump to the next slide because what slide we bring them to will depend on whether or not they answered this question correctly. So for the first one, since we don't have any previous questions, it's not going to depend on their overall score. This is just going to be like a simple branch. So maybe I'm just going to create that right now. I will duplicate this slide twice. So, and again, this isn't a simple quiz. It's not just going to be like question 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Let's do question 1A and question 1B. Okay. And my idea about this is If they answer this one incorrectly, maybe we'll show them an even easier question about a text box. And if they answer this one correctly, we'll show them a harder question about adding a text box. So now what we want to do is when the user selects this first option, we'll jump to slide 1B. We'll say B is the harder one. And when they enter any of these, and when they select any of these other options, we will jump to slide 1A. And again, I'm using that copying and paste feature just to make this really easy to add. And let's make sure I move that trigger back down in the line, because now what it does is it sets Q1 correct to true, adds 1 to that user's score, and then jumps to the next slide. So that's exactly what we need. Okay, so, and this is how branching scenarios start looking too. It just, each question branches out to multiple other questions. You get the idea. And so we're kind of killing two birds with one stone with this quiz. So let's look at question 1A now. We need to add an easier question about text boxes. So maybe the question is, how do you add text to? Do you click and drag to move triggers? You can click and drag to move triggers. I just use these little buttons too. I was using these little icons, but clicking and dragging works just as well. So good call out. Thank you for bringing attention to that. So, okay, I'm just gonna make this super basic. What is a text box? We'll say a box that holds text. Okay, we're getting really tough with these questions here, as you can see. A box that holds numbers, or there is no such thing as a text box, right? Okay, that's our easy question. If you get this one wrong, probably not super realistic. Which shortcut do you use to add a text box to a slide? Okay, so this is our more difficult version. So we'll make this option B. So Control plus T, type text, or what will our other one be? Alt plus T. Okay, so now we need to move these triggers around, of course, and we need to create a new variable. So now we're creating a new variable called is Q1B correct? And we'll do the same thing with is Q1A correct? Okay, so we have those variables in place now. That we're looking good. Let's see. So we're not setting Q1 correct to true when the user selects this first option. We're setting Q1B correct to false, because typing text is not the right shortcut. For option B, we'll set Q1B correct to true. And for option C, we'll set Q1B correct to false. Cool. Welcome, Cheryl. I see you're hopping in late. We're building an adaptive quiz, which is also going to turn into a bit of a branching scenario. So that's what's going on here. We're trying to dive into variables and conditions, and we're just now about to get to conditions. So let's see here. Q1B. So this slide is set up. Now we just need to set up Q1A for in case they get that first one wrong. So Q1A will be true. Yeah, it is a box that holds text. Q1A correct to false, and Q1A correct to false. One more thing I needed to do here. You see, we're still adding 1 to the user's score when the user selects this first option, but that's not right. We need to add this to option B. Cool. Let's get rid of this. So, sorry, I mean, let me know how we're doing in the chat. I'm kind of just repeating exactly what we did on this slide, but making sure that it's programmed correctly for these different answer choices. It's just making sure all of the variables are in order. It does take a lot of attention to detail when you are working with variables and duplicating slides like this, because if you miss one thing, If you miss one thing, it's not going to work. Or it might look like it's working, and then if you do a certain sequence of answers, it's going to break. So this one's fine. We need to add this jump to next. I duplicated this before I copied these triggers down. But let's see, where do we want to go with this next? So maybe we show question 2 if the user has answered both questions correctly. And then maybe if the user has answered either one of the questions incorrectly, we show them the question that they haven't seen yet. Does that sound like a good idea? Does that sound like a good way to dive into this programming a bit more? So if you answered 2 questions in a row correctly, you see question 2. If you answered either one incorrectly, you get kicked back to the other question. So maybe you get, or another idea. If you answer question 1 correctly, that's good. You see this one. Maybe if you answer this one incorrectly, you still go on to question 2. I don't know. Again, we didn't really plan this out beforehand. I just want to show off the programming so that you can use this on your own projects. So I think it's not super important exactly what we decide to do here. Yep, good tip, Martin. So if you're using Storyline 360, you'll notice there's this little option next to the triggers called Disable Trigger. So if you're trying to test something and you want to turn off and on certain triggers, you can press that without deleting what you just programmed. So you can just click on it right next to it. It will get a strike through, but it will still be there for you to turn back on. Good call out. Deirdre brought up another point. She asked, do you display the current value of your variable on screen when you are developing a complex interaction with variables? I definitely do that when I'm doing QA testing. So I've had some screens where I need to make sure that there's like 15 buttons on the screen and each one is supposed to affect a variable in a certain way. So when I'm testing, I'll just add a text box with that variable to the screen, and I'll click each button and make sure that variable is changing like it's supposed to. So great point. All right, Michelle, let's see. Michelle asks, so on the timeline, the uppermost item is the last item in the sequence, but in the variables box on the right where you're editing, the uppermost item is the first thing that happens. Michelle, this is a good point because this will help us clear up what's going on with the timeline and what's going on with the triggers. So the timeline is about timing of the elements on the page, okay? This is showing you the order that things are going to appear. So if I move these 3 questions to the 1 second mark, you're not going to see them until the 1 second mark. I think that much is clear, you see? This timeline has nothing to do with the order that the triggers will get executed in. Okay, so what you see over here, this is the order that the triggers will get executed in when the user clicks group 1. So the timeline has no influence over the interactivity. The timeline only has to do with when elements appear on the screen, okay? It's the when. The trigger panel over here, that's the order in which the triggers will get executed. So that's about interactivity. When I click something, what's going to happen first, second, third, fourth? This hierarchy over here on the right, that's the order that those triggers are getting executed. Good question. Okay, what else? Let's see. You see question 2 when the score equals 2. You see 1B if the score equals 1. Good. Okay, yeah, we'll do that. I think that will be a good way to show off the programming. Question 1C if score is still equal to 0. Okay, that's a good suggestion. So if the user answers this one incorrectly and this one incorrectly, they see score 1C, which is going to be like, are you a human? Okay, so we'll add that right here. So let's duplicate this. We have question 1C. This will be the easiest question of all. Are you human? Okay, we're going to really test these people's knowledge right here. This is a tough one. Oh yeah, good point. Good point, Karina. So yeah, that's a good point. This will show you how things are positioned on the slide. So sorry, a quick detour just to elaborate on that further because Karina brought up a good point. You notice here, this text box is above the button, right? So if we move this all the way to the bottom of the stack, it's going to disappear. So this is a way to position things. If you have a lot on the slide, you can also just do send to back, or you can just right-click it right on the screen here. If you right-click the actual object, send to back. And you can send backward to bring it down one layer. You notice when I click that, it just brings it down to this one layer down, or you can just send it all the way to the bottom or all the way to the top. So that's a good call out. Thank you. Okay, so let's bring this back down here. Yes, no, not applicable. Okay, we can do that. I'm not sure why your humanity would not be applicable in this quiz, but you know, I'll go for it. Okay, so is Q1C correct? True, false. So we need to change these variables. So again, when you're working with a lot of variables, it's a lot of just clicking this and making sure you change it to the one you want it to be changed to. And again, it's better to do this and just change what's right here versus making a new slide and then adding things from scratch and reprogramming it from scratch. That's obviously not an efficient workflow. So duplicate and then just change what you need to in the triggers. False. So if being a human isn't applicable, we're going to go ahead and say that's also false. And so maybe if they get this one incorrect, we just kick them back to the title screen. How does that sound? Oh yeah, Michelle, layers are different. I don't know if we're going to get into that here, but you can add a layer with this panel over here in the bottom right. And yeah, we're not going to get into that here. We would have for some other topics, but not so much for this one. Okay, so this one, if the user selects, we know that if they're here, they've already answered the other questions incorrectly. So if they get this one incorrectly, we're just going to kick them right back to the title screen. So we'll jump to the quiz screen, and then we'll duplicate that and copy this here. So if they're not human, they're getting kicked back to the start, right? There we have it. So let's make sure that's right. We don't want next and previous buttons on any of this. Or maybe on this one we do. Okay, so you see what I did here? I went back into scene view, and now when you click on the different slides, you can see these navigation settings. It tells you which buttons are on the slide. So I don't want these next and previous buttons because, one, when they click on one of the answers, it brings them to the next slide. And also, we're adding one to the user's score whenever they answer a question correctly. So we don't want someone to answer this correctly and then just go previous and answer it correctly again. If that is the functionality in your quiz, there are ways to combat that with variables and conditions, but I don't want to get too into that right here. So for now, I'm just going to turn off these next and previous buttons, and we're going to rely on them clicking the button to get to the next slide. So this is good. So if the user does say that they're human, where do we want to, oh, let me make sure I'm up with the chat. Cool. Okay, so if they answer this one right, I guess we'll just bring them to question 2 maybe. I don't know, let's get all of this programmed right. I'm going to make a question 2 now, just so that we have somewhere to send people. So this one will be question 2. So here's how we're going to make this programming work. So here's question 1. They answer this correctly, they go to 1B. If they answer it incorrectly, they go to 1A. Good. Okay. On 1A, if they answer it correctly, we're going to show them 1B. Or how did we decide we're going to do this? If they answer it correctly, we show them 1B, and if they answer it incorrectly, we show them 1C. Okay, so right now we're still just using straight up regular triggers. We haven't had to use conditions yet. So a box that holds text, we're going to bring them to 1C. A box that holds numbers, oh wait, sorry. So this one's the correct one, so we'll bring them to 1B. And if they say there's no such thing as a text box, we also bring them to 1B. Yeah, this session will be available live as soon as, this recording will be available as soon as this session is over. Okay, good point. So we haven't had to use conditions yet because this is the first question, but let's see if on 1B we'll have to do that. So on 1B, let's see. Because on 1B, their score could technically be 3 after they get it right now, you see? Because on question 1, you know, they're going to get a point for answering it right. On question 1A, they can get a point for answering it right. And now on question, I think we'll just bring them to question 2. Because again, we're doing this by difficulty, so we don't want to show them the more difficult question if they answer this medium difficulty question incorrectly. So let's scratch that. If they get it incorrectly, we're going to bring them into question 1C, and if they get it correct, we're just going to bring them to question 2. Right? Okay, question 1A. So if they answer, okay, good. So this one is good now. Something important, because you notice in question C, we're bringing them back to the first slide. If you are doing a quiz from scratch like this, you want to make sure that you're resetting these variables on the first slide. The only one you really need to reset is the score variable, because we're only adding on to that. So they might get a, actually, it's not even applicable here, because if they get kicked back to the beginning, their score is already 0. So they're kind of out of luck. But if you have like a restart button at the end or something, make sure either on that button or on this slide, we're setting everything back down to 0. Cool. So question 2. Sorry, guys, we've got a lot going on here. I think if we were to do this the right way, we would have obviously planned this in a text document or a tool like Twine to know what goes where, but I do want to get into this. So question B, they've answered both questions correctly at this point. If they answer it correctly, if they answer the second question correctly, we're going to bring them to question 2. Good. I mean, or do we want to bring them into a more difficult path here? I don't know. Do you guys want to keep taking this further? I don't know how far we're going to build out this branching in the next 15 minutes. So let me know what we want to do. Do we want to figure out a way to make sense of this? Let's try and be it. So if they answer this one, we're bringing them to question 2. If they answer it incorrectly, we're also bringing them to question 2, right? Yeah, if they answer question 1B incorrectly, we're also bringing them to question 2. Twine is something we can use for storyboarding. You would want to use it for branching scenarios. I mean, because look at what you see here. Let me show you Twine. Because in storyline, like if we keep branching out in each of these things, it's just going to become super wide, and it's really hard to navigate in this little window, like what's going on. So Twine is a good tool to prototype things, because like look at this screenshot. You wind up having kind of like an artboard, I guess you could call it, that looks like this, and you can add options using like a couple of square brackets. So like you would do like square bracket, choice A, and square bracket, and you would say which slide that choice brings you to. So then when you're developing it in storyline, you would look at that slide, you would see which slides it's going to, and you would just model your storyline triggers based off of that. And you can set up conditions and stuff in a tool like Twine as well. So it's just like it's kind of like using XD to mock up visual designs, because it's really easy to add shapes and stuff here, and to move them around, and you can just like drag in a picture and it will like take the form of the shape. XD is a really good tool for mocking up visual designs, and Twine is a really good tool for mocking up branching scenarios, and realizing this now, a good tool for mocking up adaptive quizzes. So having this experience and seeing how this is going, I feel like in a next session like this, maybe I need to come up with some topic ideas that will make sense to do within an hour. Because yeah, I think I just dove into storyline here because of the time constraints, but I don't think, it's it's kind of hard building something like this when you haven't planned out how everything's going to be working in a tool like Twine, or even just writing it down in plain English on something like Google Docs. So, oh, nice. You started using Twine? Yeah. Is it possible to copy designs from XD to Storyline? So it is. So what you would do in a tool like XD, so if we look at our story size right here, it's 720 by 540. So this is telling us what size this artboard is right here. Whenever you start working on mockups in XD, like I don't want to mock up a slide on this because this aspect ratio isn't right. So if I try to copy this over to Storyline, it's not going to match up. Like this is more widescreen, so that's going to be counterproductive. So what you would want to do is you would want to select this artboard and change it to the size of your story size. So 720 by 540. So you can see the width and height here. I would change it to 720 by 540. And now this is the exact same aspect ratio and size as our Storyline course. So whatever we add here, we will be able to, if it's just like a background that we've developed and it's not interactive and it's nothing that we need animating in, we can just export this entire artboard and we can just like add that as an image to Storyline and it can look super developed. You can have your buttons here. Maybe you have like some sort of avatar in the top right. Maybe you have a logo in the top left. You would have text boxes. So if you don't need to animate stuff in, you can just export this as an image and just add it right on the page, and that's super easy. If there are pieces, like if you want to animate your buttons in, you obviously need them as separate elements in Storyline. So you would export each of these, and then you would have to import them back into Storyline. So something else to show you about how this would work, just to show you the concept, is what you would do once we start using the branching is it wouldn't just be jump to a specific slide. It would be jump to, let me make a couple more really quick. Okay. Yeah, because the programming is really the valuable part of this, I think. So what you would do here is you wouldn't jump to the next slide. You would jump to slide 2A when the user clicks group 1 if, and here's where we get into the conditions, if the user's score is greater than or equal to 3. Okay, so here's how we would do it with conditions. And if you would want to do it based off of how they answered previous questions, you would do, okay, go to 2A if Q1A correct is true, and if Q1 B correct is true, or something like that. You get the idea. So you would use conditions based off of these variables to decide what to show them next. And so this is just a simple example of that. Obviously, we're not going to build some long experience here that actually makes use of this because this is a lot of work, but a lesson learned. But this is just a quick example of, conditions and variables go hand in hand. So you use variables to store information about how the user is experiencing the course or what selections they're making. Because again, a really common pattern with variables and conditions is, say you have a slide. Say you have a slide with 3 options, okay? This rectangle will work. So say it's like, okay, yeah, explore this content at your own pace. And I do a lot of, maybe I can just show a real example of this in a recent write-up I did. So you see a slide like this. So select each customer value driver to learn more. So these are 3 different buttons that the user can select. And maybe it will open up a light box or it will bring them to a series of other slides. And then they get kicked back to this slide. What you would do is you would use a variable to determine whether or not those slides were viewed. So if I click on this middle one, whenever I get to the last slide in that sequence, I would create a variable called like, let's see, deliver better products viewed. Deliver products viewed, true or false. And once the user views all of the slides associated with that, I would change that variable to true. And then whenever the user gets to this slide, I would make this change to some visited state if that variable is true. So in this case, I made this white background turn more like grayed out to indicate that you already viewed it. You can also use check boxes. they can be hidden by default. But if that variable is equal to true, then you can change their state to normal whenever the timeline starts. And that's all using conditions. Okay, let's see if there are other questions. Again, yeah, I'm sorry I'm jumping all around. This is the first time doing a session like this. I think we got in a bit over our heads with this topic, but I hope you are learning something about Storyline and how to best take advantage of the tool. And if you have any feedback about how this was run, feel free to provide it to me either on LinkedIn or even in the comments here or something like that, because I do want to make sure this improves over time and that this hour we're spending together is as useful as possible. Cool. Okay, Hannah asked a question, is the true/false used for navigating which question they get next? That was my idea. So my idea is down the line, I would want to know which questions they got correct. So let's see. How do you add a text box to the slide? Maybe later on, maybe at the end of the question, if their score is over 10, but they haven't answered this question correctly, maybe I show them this question again. Okay, so yeah, it's like they're doing well. They seem to be on a roll. Let's put this, if the question 1 response is equal to false, maybe we redirect the user back here to this question before bringing them to the ending screen. And that would result in a lot of variables and conditions. Building something like this would be a good exercise in using variables and conditions, that's for sure. And if you are someone who has been getting by with Storyline without using variables and conditions, I mean, I would suggest sitting down whenever you have some free time over a weekend or something and working on a project like this where it makes heavy use of this. A fun one to do that I've seen people do before are BuzzFeed style quizzes. And someone even suggested that for this session. Because, based off of how people respond to each question, you need to keep track of those responses in a variable. So Taylor in the chat did a cool Harry Potter sorting quiz. And based off of which option you pick, you'll have points assigned to specific houses. And then at the end, you have to use a condition. If this house has the highest number of points, you would jump to this specific slide. So just working on a project like that will be a good way to start realizing the power of combining variables with conditions in a Storyline course. And I think that's what makes the difference between an average Storyline developer and then someone who can really take advantage of the tool to do the more technical programming tasks. All right, I'm sure I've been missing some stuff in the chat. Let me check really quick. Yeah, Suzanne brought up a really good use case for something like this. Suzanne says, I've seen quizzes placed at the beginning of a course that determined if you had to take the entire course or a summarized version of it. Conditions are a great way to do this. And yeah, I've seen examples like that too. Maybe that would have been easier to build, I think, than something like this where there's so much branching involved. Because what you do is you show a quick 5-question or 10-question pretest. You keep track of the user's score. And then on that last slide of the pretest, if the user score is above a certain number, you jump to a scene with an abbreviated version of the course. Or if their score is below a certain number, you would jump to a scene with that long version of the course. So that's a really simple way to do it. You would just use one variable which holds the user's score, and then just those 2 triggers, jump to scene 1, jump to scene 2, based off of whether or not that score is above or below a certain number. So that's a really good use case or example. Thank you for bringing that up. I need a lesson outline. Yeah, Cheryl, that is a good idea, and that would have made sense if I could have prepared for this more. But the nature of the session, I don't know which one we're going to go with, so it would be kind of hard to have a little outline for all 10 of the different options. But that is why I think it would be good to restrict the number of options to things that I do have some sort of materials prepared for, so we can not have so much friction with deciding how to actually build the thing. Thank you for the people. Thank you for the positive feedback. I'm glad to hear that people are learning something from this. Yeah, I like the interactive nature. So yeah, thank you everyone who came and did. I think people adding stuff in the chat definitely made the session more valuable for everyone who attended. So thank you for that. I think that was the highlight. The takeaways from the chat versus actually building this mess we have right here. So thank you for that. Oh, okay. Pia asked if we can show the finished product of what clicking the button would look like. Sure. It's just going to bring us from slide to side. And I obviously didn't develop it all the way. And let me add some variable references to the screen to make that even more clear. So if you want to show the variable on the screen, you just do a percentage sign, and then you would do the you just type in the name of the variable. So and then you do a percentage sign again. So you kind of wrap your variable name in a text box around these 2% signs. So this is going to not look pretty or anything, but we'll add this to each slide so that you can see what the user's current score is. And I know we don't get very far, but we'll just bring it to question 2. So we'll preview the entire scene. All right, welcome to the quiz. What is the correct? How do you add text? You insert. You go to the insert tab and then select text box. So you see now we added 1 to that variable. And now which shortcut do you use? We would use Control+T. And then it changes to 2. So you see how that happened? So, if you entered that incorrectly, that variable wouldn't change. So that's the idea. Cool. All right. Well, I'm glad to hear that people are getting value from, let's do a poll. Well, maybe, I think we had a bunch of people drop off as we got to the end of it. It's kind of hard. The people who are here to, the people who are here to see this interactive, adaptive thing built, we didn't really get very far with it. So, but I think the process and, the quick tips and stuff, hopefully that helped. I'll have to talk to some people and see how we approach this in 2 weeks when we do this session again. I do like the on-the-fly nature, but yeah, I felt, I started to get lost a little bit, as you guys could tell, once we were getting in the weeds on how to make this work with no reference to serve as like our storyboard or guide. So lesson learned on that front. Thank you, Eve. Yeah, I've spent, I've spent literally thousands of hours in Storyline, and I'm sure there's stuff I don't know. Like I know there's shortcuts I don't use that I could be using. But as far as how to make things technically possible, especially with variables and conditions, I can definitely help out with that kind of stuff as needed. Cool. Yeah, Martin brought up another good point. So this is like the quick way. Look at me using that Control-T shortcut. So this is the quick way to show a variable reference, just typing it in a text box. But another way to do it is the user's response is you can actually insert it using the insert tab. So you would go to where you want it in the text box, and then you would go to insert reference, and then you would click the variable reference that you want to include. So you notice but what that will do is it will just add that exact format. But it is useful if you don't know what you named your variable, or it's a long name and you just want to pick it from a list. That is another way to go about that. Yes, the recording will be available right when the session is over. Yeah, thank you everyone who came. I'm glad you got some value from it. We'll wrap this up now. Again, next week, it will be Wednesday night, my time. We're doing a session with Kath Ellis about how to grow a freelance e-learning business. Feel free to bring a bunch of questions to that. She's like an amazing e-learning freelancer. So we'll both be fielding questions from the audience. And then the following week, I'll try to do another Storyline workshop. And we'll figure out if that will look just like this one did, or if it will be a more limited list of options. We'll see. Feel free to message me on LinkedIn if you have specific feedback about how to improve this format. Cool. Thank you, everybody. I will see you next week. Cool. Thank you for coming, and bye-bye.